Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with Trent Jones, my co-host.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Not much, man. I'm drinking some...
You're drinking?
I'm drinking. Yeah, I'm drinking some Elijah Craig, small batch.
Okay, all
which
right.
used to
Nice.
have a 12-year age statement that they got rid of sometime around 2018, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, so I always hear Elijah Craig mentioned as like one of the affordable buys, but I've never had it.
Yeah,
What do you think?
It is still a $30 whiskey, and you can find it anywhere. You know, you can find it at Walmart, you can find it at the grocery store. You're never going to have a problem finding Elijah Craig, and the prices stay the same. In fact, if you have Costco near you, you can occasionally find it there in 1.75 liters for $42, at least here in Phoenix. I don't know what other markets charge for that because, you know, the liquor tax is different everywhere, but yeah, $42 for a handle. And, you know, I buy it at Walmart every month, you know, because I stretch this thing out. My members have some too.
All right, nice. Yeah, that's good. Well, maybe I'll have to pick up some. Well, how does it? Let me ask this: how does it compare to Evan Williams Bottled and Bond?
It has a little more kick to it. I mean, I put a tiny bit of water. It's like 94, but it's got some heat to it naturally. You know, even though it's a lower proof. You know, Elijah Craig barrel proof is amazing, man. That's probably one of my favorites.
Yeah. Interesting. I'll have to try some of the Elijah Craig sometime. I'm drinking Scotch today. I was feeling in a bit more refined mood.
Yeah.
So I've got some Macallan 18 in here.
Is that the double oak or the sherry cask?
It is a triple oak.
Triple oak. Oh,
I believe this is triple oak. It comes with a purple label.
Okay.
I believe it is triple oak, and I think it's sherry oak is what they say, what they call it. I don't know what that means, but
what was the price point?
this was a gift. I think it's probably pretty expensive.
Well,
so truth be told, so I'm trying to finish this bottle up because I've had it, and I've had this bottle for 3 years now.
Okay.
And I've had just, you know, a couple inches of whiskey left in the bottle for the last year. And I poured some over the holidays and I realized like it's probably lost a little bit of the flavor that it had. It doesn't seem to be as good as I remember it. Still very good, but not quite as good. And so I'm like, you know, I think I might just need to finish this thing off. I think I might have left in the bottle too long.
well, I know that they have different, there's different expressions of it, and the more expensive one is the sherry cask, Macallan 12.
Okay.
Then they have, I think, probably what you're referring to is the triple oak. I thought it was double, but it might be triple.
There's probably both.
Yeah, there might be.
There
might be.
There's probably both. Yeah, I'm not super familiar with Macallan's offerings. I'm not a huge fan of the lower age statement stuff. You know, like the Macallan. What's sort of the basic one? A 12, I think.
That's a 12, isn't that what you're drinking?
No, this is the 18. 18.
Oh, the 18. Shit, man. I'm like,
It's here we go. It's the Fine Oak 18. Yeah,
so
pinky's up.
So the Macallan 18, at least the sherry cask finish, is a $300 bottle.
That's I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, this was a very generous gift from a client.
Yeah, I mean, I think that even the one you have sitting there is probably not. They're not far apart when you look at the different casks until you get to the higher age statements. But typically, the higher age statements are that sherry cask, and I've, I don't know what I have because those bottles look similar. I'm pretty sure that I've had the 12 and sherry cask. I have not had anything higher than that. The 15 is one of those double or triple oak ones. Then the 18 comes in a sherry cask, and that one I know is $300, and the pours at the restaurants are really expensive.
Yeah. It's well, yeah. So lest y'all think that I'm over here, you know, buying multi-$100 bottles of scotch on a regular basis. No, that's not the case. This was a gift. It's a very generous gift. I've been milking this bottle for 3 years now, and it's time to finish it off. I will say, so I said it doesn't taste as good as I remember it. It still tastes really good. It's a really nice scotch. And one of the things I'm no expert here. I'm not a scotch bro, but I've noticed that when you get up to the 18 and 20 year, man, the scotch just smooths out so beautifully.
That's the
I don't know
problem
if
with
bourbon's
Scotch.
the same way. Yeah, it's a very different experience. If you've only had like 10, 12 year scotches, if you can ever get your hands on some 18 plus, it's quite good. It's quite good.
So that is the problem with Scotch, is that it starts to get good at like 18, 20 plus years, but
Right.
it also starts to get expensive.
Very expensive at that point. Yeah.
I think the Balvenie 17 Doublewood is probably, just as good, or maybe even better than the Macallan 18. And that's like $170 price point. So
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of the. I always tell people, like, if they're going to try a Scotch for the first time, if I have some, I'll pour it. But if not, I'll tell them to get the Balvenie 12, the Doublewood, Balvenie Doublewood 12, because I think that's just it's like, if you don't like that, you're just not going to like Scotch, in my opinion.
pretty much, because it's pretty mild. It's not super peaty, It's got some
Yeah, and
sweetness
it's very
to it.
very balanced. Yeah, it's kind of like the bourbon of Scotch. It
Yeah.
tastes like Scotch. It's a good Scotch. I like it a lot, but it's it's very balanced. No weird flavors. Yeah, no, doesn't taste like ash.
No, that one I got introduced to by an old friend of mine. She was a lifter I used to train about 6-7 years ago. And she was a waitress at various places out east and here as well, a place here. And we went to a bar in Scottsdale, and she ordered Scotch. And I was like, okay. And then she told me to try the Balvenie 14, and this is how much of an amateur I was back then. She was like, here, you throw some water in it that'll open up the flavor. And that one was the Caribbean cask. And
Yes, that's good.
Yeah, that's the 14-year, and I remember that was really good.
Rum cask.
Yeah. And I should own that bottle, and I don't. I have the 21. I think that's the only one I have, actually. But the one I defaulted to over the years was the 15, the sherry cask, which is pretty good.
Okay, I've not had that one. Yeah, I've had the Caribbean cask. I've had the 12, and I've had the Portwood 21 year. That was another gift from years ago.
That one's a $300 bottle. Yeah,
that was really good.
I drink that once a year, if that. I mean, I don't think I've had it since. When was the last time I poured that? Probably pre-pandemic. I haven't poured it in years.
Yeah. So, all right. So I have a question for you. Do you know this? I have heard differing opinions on this, that if you have a certain amount of air volume in the bottle, that it does kind of, I guess it degrades the flavor over time. Like, so if the bottle's like half full, it's fine. But if it's like a quarter full, you got to go ahead and drink it. That's what I've heard.
I think if you're down
true.
to, I think if you're down to the last drop, I mean, if you've let that last drop sit for a while, it could be psychological, but I think it tastes different than if you've had half the bottle for a while,
Right. Yeah. That's what. Okay. So that's what I think I'm tasting here, because it's been like the last 2 inches, let's say, that I've had sitting there for at least a year.
Yeah. I think
anyway,
there's something
still
to
good
that.
stuff.
Here's the awkward segue. We talked too much about booze, and now we're going to jump into what we need to be talking about here, and that today is growth for the non-bodybuilder and otherwise non-competitor, right? What the fuck does that mean, right? Because I think some of the messaging in this business, and I don't even know, you and I, we're starting to, like, I don't even know if we're starting to. We belong in a whole another category, but we acknowledge people that are, watching this, listening to this, who've read my content. A lot of them have had background in the fitness industry, right? Have had, history of reading stuff. They're familiar with it, right?
Yeah, a lot of my clients follow a handful of guys on Instagram, or they read their blog or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So, people that come to us, probably 75% of them are familiar with fitness, quote unquote, right? And I'd say 25% of them have never done any of this before. And, in some ways that's better. It's, I took a breakdancing class once in 2006, I think. But no, later than that, probably 2008, 7 or 8. And I remember the instructor was like, it's good that you never done this before, because it's better to learn good habits than to unlearn bad ones. And, as somebody who's coached things, I would agree with that.
That's true. Very true. Yeah, and in setting expectations too, right?
Yeah.
Which I think was what we're going to talk about today, in part.
Of course.
If you start looking at people who are huge outliers, or not telling you the whole story of what they're doing, they sell you this idea that you can be like them.
Exactly.
And that's how they attract followers. And that's I think that's what we're going to talk about today.
So let me piggyback on that for a second. So, when I was growing up, I grew up in Chicago in the 90s, so that was the Jordan era of basketball. And it was pretty well understood that Michael Jordan was a genetic outlier, right? And it's still pretty well fucking understood, right? And, you know, you never heard anybody say that if you played basketball enough and worked hard enough at basketball, you would get to Jordan's level, right? And the same can be said about, you know, Nolan Ryan. He was a pitcher at the time, you know. I think he was on the Texas?
Yeah, he was with the Rangers at the early 90s.
Yeah.
He was he was like 43 and still throwing 100 miles an hour.
Exactly. Yeah, that was an amazing athlete, right? And you know, the list goes on. You know, if you go through hockey or, you know, the NFL, that was the Cowboys era, you know, 91, 92, right? Was that right? Or 92, 93? I can't remember. You're from Texas.
Yeah. That sounds about right. Oh, so I'll give you a little stat there for all you Cowboys fans out there. I'm gonna make you cry.
That's better for you to do it than me. See, my stepdad was a Cowboys fan that lived in Illinois. His brother lived in Dallas, so he went to those Super Bowls. Trent, the Bills and the Cowboys, he went to, I think, both of them.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, so I've got a funny stat that I saw after the Cowboys lost. You know, surprisingly, they lost again in the first round of the playoffs. Mm-hmm. That's never happened before. So the Dallas Cowboys, guess how many playoff wins they've had since 1997?
Is it triple digits?
No. Not even close.
Don't tell me it's 10.
Not even close.
5?
The Dallas Cowboys
they went to the Super Bowl.
They have, so since 1997, right? That was the last time. Okay, so since then, they have a total of 4 playoff wins.
Holy shit, how did they start sucking?
Okay, I'll give you here's another comparison here. So Tom Brady, he has more playoff wins in his time in Tampa Bay than the Cowboys have had in the last 25 years. So old-ass Tom Brady, right before he retired, you know, he spent, 2-3 years with Tampa? Mm-hmm. He got more playoff wins then than the Cowboys have in the last 25 years. Man, I saw that stat and I'm like, wow, that puts it in perspective. Well, so yeah, there you go. There's America's team for you.
I guess that you can probably figure out when they started fixing football games. But yeah, we digress. The point here is when watching actual sports versus, you know, the fake sports we dabble in, people acknowledge that they can't work their ass off to be as good as these people, you know? If you want to go the aesthetic route, you know, if you look at a fucking fashion model or a Hollywood star, no amount of plastic surgery, makeup, and bullshit is going to make you look like that person, right? And we know that, you know, we know that the prettiest people in the world are cast for these things, right? Right. You got to have the best looking people for the camera, so that makes the movie more appealing, you know, because it's an art form, right? It's a visual art form on top of it, so you want everything to look good, right? And, you know, it's subjective. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I get that, you know, but let's be honest. These people look different than most people. Let's just put it that way, you know?
Yeah.
And no amount of hard work or even, you know, technology is going to make you look like one of these people. No amount of hard work or pharmaceuticals, you know, for those of you that say, oh, well, you know, pro athletes are on steroids. Well, you know, that's the last 5%, you know, or put whatever percentage you want. You can't measure it, but I'm going to say 5. Rip says the last 3%. Maybe it's 10%, but it's not 95% of it. You know, there's no technique steroids, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we acknowledge this, right? Largely that these people are genetic outliers and can do things we can't do. Let me give a more practical example, right? Because not everybody's played sports. Most people have been through elementary school, probably high school, and then, you know, third of the country has graduated college, you know, and then more have went to college, right? Third of the country, I mean the U.S. I know we have listeners overseas too. So, okay, a lot of people have been to school before at some level, right? So just think about those days for a second, if you can remember them. Remember that kid that, you know, just showed up to class, didn't study, and, you know, got 100% on everything? We all remember him. We all had him at some point in some class, right? Or in some subject, right? You know, he was born that way, and we acknowledge that. We don't challenge that. We're like, how the fuck? That is fucking amazing how he can do that, right? I mean, that's how I thought, right? Maybe,
right.
You know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember kids like that.
So now let's bring it back home. Now, why is it that when we open up a fitness magazine or go on Instagram and follow a fitness influencer, you know, they sell this lie that doesn't seem to die. It's been 50 years that this lie has been circulating in various different ways. It's been repackaged, rebranded, and resold. That if you work hard, you can look like that person in the picture, you know? I had a guy once tell me, and he was, you know, more of an ectomorph, narrow build, tend to be on the leaner side, thinner. That told me he wanted to look like Dwayne the Rock Johnson. And I think back on it now, having more experience in the business. He was a great guy, great client, worked hard, got great results. And, I half wasn't as brash with my clients back then, and also half still a little bit naive about things, I understood.
Yeah.
I was just starting to understand what drugs did in the weight room, and the role of genetics and all that. But I wasn't so direct with it back then, like I am now. But like I look back on that, I'm like, that's like a crazy thing, dude. You're like, okay, 6'2", 6'3", sub 200 pounds at baseline, and you have a full-time job that's very demanding. You had a very demanding job, and just the structure's not there. The Rock's a Samoan, first of all. This guy was, this guy was
Right.
Caucasian. I don't know what his background
he's
was. Yeah,
huge.
he's a Samoan. Those guys can get really fat and really muscular, if they want to.
He's he's like what 6'5" or
He's
something.
6'4", which
he was
really
he
means
was
he's 6'2", but his recorded weight or recorded height 6'4".
I mean, I believe so. All right, so I believe watching The Rock, up there against these other guys. A lot of those wrestlers were 6.5 feet tall, somewhere in that ballpark, and he was as big as most of them.
Yeah.
So yeah. But he's a big guy. I think the thing is, if you see that guy not standing against a bunch of other professional wrestlers, but you see him standing against regular people, he would be the biggest dude in the room by far.
Of course. And then on the what we're talking about, we're talking about men right now. There's similar shit with women, and that's been going on far longer, I think. Before it was, if you follow this diet or take this supplement or get this surgery, you can be a size 0, and you can weigh nothing. That was like what I remember growing up. That was being sold to women, and I think this goes way back, and now it's, there's this appetite for muscle. There's this market for lifting and for females, right? And they want to have visible abs and big asses. This is like the types of things I hear. Like I want a big booty like the Instagram model. Or
the peach.
Or I want abs. I want no fat on my stomach whatsoever, right? And
usually like either visible triceps or at least like no visible body fat on the bottom of the arms.
Body fat is bad, and we'll dive into that too. But and then when you go into like competitive physique contests, then they want lateral delts or posterior delts. They sound more like bodybuilders now, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's the same kind of thing, right? If you're like this small, petite woman, you're not going to get big delts like the girl who, was a softball pitcher, or, a shot putter or a sprinter. You're not going to have big quads like a Olympic weightlifter that, competes at the world stage, That's not going to happen through training in a lot of cases. But there's this belief that it's just a matter of work and formula and the program and this supplement and this, that's a lot of that's bullshit. What's true is what we've been telling you. If you lift weights and you get stronger, your muscles will grow from where they were at baseline. So if you're a 115-pound female and your baseline squat is the bar and you're benching 35 pounds and you're pressing 25 pounds, you can move the needle on that. You might squat, let's assume you're young and don't have a bunch of orthopedic issues. You probably squat 1.5 times body weight, deadlift double body weight, and press 75% body weight, and, get as close as you can to a body weight bench. That one's a little bit hit or miss, I've noticed, but you could do that if you dedicate, 2 to 4 years to it. It takes time, and I say that rather casually because that's about how long it takes, On the same note, if you're a 160-pound woman, 180-pound woman on the heavier side, you're going to probably lift quite a bit, but you're not going to be a size 0, most likely,
No.
I'm assuming normal height. What normal height for female? 5'4" to 5'6", something like that, right? You're just there's just things that are baked into the cake that you can't. In healthcare, we used to call them modifiable risk factors and non-modifiable risk factors in the context of cardiovascular disease. So basically what that means is there are things you can change, through hard work, and there are things you cannot, right? And the example I was giving, we talk about family history was something you couldn't change. Sex was something you couldn't change, And in this case, it's kind of the same thing, right? Family history totally plays a role here. If you don't have muscular people in your family tree, then you're going to have a hard time building muscle. If you have marathoners, if you're from a multi-generation family of marathoners, you're pissing upstream,
Right.
If you come from, a multi-generational family of American football players, then, you might have a good chance, So you gotta look at the things you can't control first before you start deciding how much effort you want to put into the things you can control, because that amount of effort to get a certain output is going to vary based on those things you can't modify, right? So if you have shit genetics, right? Like, let's say you're real smart up here, you're real smart, but you're unathletic, motor moron, can't coordinate shit. You're going to spend, 5 to 10 years to get to where, the football guy starts. Think about that. Think about that for a second. You know?
Well, yeah. Although I will be the devil's advocate here, because I see a lot of people just, in common parlance, blame genetics for things like, oh, that's genetic, right? And a lot of times they're talking about like chronic disease.
Yeah, we're not saying to do that. We're not saying to do that.
But like people will blame genetics on stuff like, oh, well, it's just genetic, and it's like, and what they're implying when they say that is that it's not my habits that caused this. It's just something I inherited. And I think when it comes to the realm of physical fitness, there's a lot of people that never had any athletic exposure as kids. And so they have no idea what their genetic potential is. Their epigenetics are all screwed up, right? So the expression of the genes that they do have, like you could say their genes are underexpressed, right? For athletic development. And that's the whole of it, right? That's strength, that's coordination, balance, all the 10 general physical skills. And so, training is a process of developing that, as well as seeing what your genetic potential could be, right? So I think there's a lot of people who have not even gotten themselves to that baseline level of development of, learning to use their body to even start training effectively for a while, right? And so I'm talking about the person who's like didn't play sports in high school or growing up as a kid, and were sedentary for most of their adult life until they decided to start training. That person has not developed the baseline physical skills that the person who played sports as a kid and maybe played a little bit of high school sports, and then, even if they had 10 years or whatever afterwards that they laid off and they weren't super active, they still had developed those sort of baseline physical skills. And I think that makes a big difference when it comes to, how far you're going to go when you train.
100%. We're not saying that, oh, you're genetically fucked and you get to blame that when shit doesn't go well.
Right.
That's not what we're saying. We're saying that you have to consider that when you're making the decision to pursue a certain goal. If you are a motor moron, like a real motor moron that also can't get strong very easily, and you figure this out quick, and you want a 500 deadlift, prepare for a lot of fucking frustration for the next decade, versus,
right.
If you're a mediocre lifter and you're male, you might do it in 3 to 5 years,
Right.
You might do it in 3 to 5 years, but if you're a motor moron, you know who you are. You know who you are. You're, 5'9", you're 160 pounds, 170 pounds, you're 30% body fat. You can barely walk straight without having to think about it. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but, you have no idea what your body is doing at any point in time. And, you're struggling with weights that, guys do their first day. A lot of guys do their first day, right? You're on the left tail of the bell curve. That's okay. That's okay because you can get stronger than you are now and you can be better off in the long run, right? But you don't get to say, I'm a motor moron, so therefore I'm not going to work hard. You can put your talents elsewhere. You're always welcome to do that, but your genetics aren't stopping you from getting stronger than you were yesterday. And that's your mindset, your proclivity for hard work. I've heard that being argued as genetic, and maybe it is. Where do you draw the line on this shit? Wherever it makes sense to you. Where I draw the line is if you suck at something, but it's important to you to improve at it, or it's going to give you some benefit, then you got to deal with all the bullshit that comes with it. I'm not a phenomenal lifter, but I get it. I accidentally squatted 315, and I've coached guys that had to work hard to do that, So I get it. I'm not in the worst position there, but I'm not in the best position either. I didn't, pull 475 my first deadlift. I know guys that have, So there's a big, wide range of results here, And, for the females, it's the same thing. I've seen women that are, petite and struggling to deadlift 75 pounds the first day. And then I've had women that have a little bit of muscle on them, 5, 6, 135 pounds, pulling 175 for 5 the first day, I've seen it all. I've seen old guys, do 265 on the deadlift for 3 sets of 5 at age 75, 6 foot, 185 pounds, Then I've seen young guys that, are throwing out their back doing that same weight, the same size,
Right.
So it just, there's a lot of variability here. And that's really what this episode's about. I'm just telling you the pool of people that we deal with who are not phenomenal athletes and the variety of responses that we see. And they're not anything close to what a pro with a 45-inch vertical jump can do,
Right.
And still, even then, we see a variety of results. We see, like I said, a woman comes in, she's in good shape, she's young, 75 pounds for 5, knees caving in, things are falling apart. But then, you get another woman, similar size, 175 for 5. But then, when you get in athletics, you might get a woman that pulls 275 for 5 the first day,
Right.
Like that happens. I have a guy right now, his wife's was a volleyball player at the collegiate level, and she was squatting more than he was. He's 6'2", I think he's over 200. He's a good size. I can't remember what his exact weight is, and he might be listening to this. We talk a lot. But he said his wife squatted more than him, not anymore. But, he's struggling to climb up to 400, and she squatted 300 when she was playing,
Yeah, right, right.
So there's a lot of variability there. Obviously, if he puts in the work long enough, he's going to squat more than she could ever squat, obviously, because men have an advantage there, But he has to work hard for it, Her thing was a byproduct of a side activity she did to enhance her main activity. It's kind of funny how that works, right? On the other hand, he got to over 300 pretty quick, but to get to 400, he has to work hard, The point there is that, you're not going to, hard work isn't going to get you an elite result. We got to really hammer this home, because a lot of what the information you're consuming, if you look into fitness, if you're one of these people that has looked into fitness for information on this, is going to tell you, do this to do what I do, or look how I look, And it's horseshit. It's total fucking horseshit. And, when it comes to like appearance, you're going to look better if you lift. You're going to look better if you add weight to the bar. Every single fucking time, unless you hate muscle mass, and nobody listening to this hates muscle mass. So we're going to, fuck those people, But you're going to look better if you lift weights, add weight to the bar, and do your 5 basic exercises. So to that point, we always hear this, strength, growth dichotomy that doesn't really exist, because growth is a product of strength. We just got a lot of people playing with words now, saying, oh, well, you have to do it this way if your goal is hypertrophy, and do it this way if your goal is strength. And then even, when you look at their own meta-analyses, they say that it doesn't fucking matter if you're progressing. If you're progressing, if you're doing 5s or 3s and you're adding to that, you're going to see growth. If you're doing 15s or 20s and you add to that, you're going to see growth. And it's comparable. So I don't know why this dichotomy continues to exist and is being propagated by the same people that say that they both lead to growth, right? So if they both lead to growth, by extension, it's always a product of strength. It's just how you measure strength, right? Like, you don't have to max out like a power lifter and do 3 lifts. So sure, if you're saying that, you don't have to squat, bench, and deadlift to get bigger. Because we also press and do chin-ups and eventually row, and then we add curls too. And I do calf raises. If you care about calves, you have to train calves. So there's you have to add exercises depending on what you're trying to grow, but not as many as people say. You got a lot of confounding variables there when it comes to growth. If you look on how to grow muscle, the bodybuilders dominate all the information on this. They've been deemed the experts on how to grow muscle because they have large muscles. But having large muscles doesn't mean that they train to have large muscles. They may have been born with large muscles. They may have taken drugs and then fucked around in the gym and got larger muscles. And those are the two things that often happen. Bodybuilders are born. You don't train a bodybuilder. They're born that way. And drugs become part of the game. It's a drug contest as well. How many pharmaceuticals can you take in what combinations and not fuck up your liver? That plays into this. And that also plays into powerlifting as well, for different reasons, but the same thing, right? It's eventually to lift more weight, you take more drugs. That's what happens. And that's just, it's a sport. So that's what's happening in the NFL. They're taking drugs and all sorts of shit to keep themselves playing. Same thing in MLB,
But they test. But they test for those.
And I got a bridge to sell you, Trent.
Yeah, right. Well, I think, so our buddy Dante Trudell, who our friend Andy Baker on the podcast has talked about, and we've talked about him too here. Dante has actually been posting a lot on his Instagram page lately, so it's always a treat when he has a post. But he said more or less the same thing. He's like, look, when you look at the field of bodybuilders, there are guys who know how to train in the field of bodybuilding, but they're the minority. And he's like, the way that you find the good information amongst the sea of bodybuilders is you look at all the guys who grow consistently even after they've gotten to a baseline level of big. Because he's like, the guys who get big and stay big, but just they never go anywhere for years and years, those are the guys who, they're the genetic phenoms like you're talking about that sort of accidentally got big because they've got really favorable genetics for it and they did some drugs. But he's like, there's other guys you see, they get big and they continue to add to their physique over the next decade. And they're all doing the same stuff. He's like, but some of these guys have figured out how to train. And those are the people you want to pay attention to. And that's the, more or less, if you had to boil down his whole dog crap DC training philosophy, it's that you got to pick a rep range. So you got to pick some exercises that are going to hit the target muscle groups you want to grow. Then you got to pick a rep range and you got to add weight to it. That's what he says. He's like, that's the thing everybody missed is you got to add weight and progressively overload it.
His phrase is, you need to beat the logbook, is what he says.
Beat the logbook. That's right. So if you did 8 reps, you got to do 9 reps. You got to do 10 reps. You got to add 2.5 pounds, 5 pounds, whatever it is, to create progressive overload over time. And so it's funny, like even if you delve into the bodybuilding side of things, there's a dichotomy there again about what people are saying. But yeah, the guys who are popular, who you see all over Instagram and YouTube and shit, those are the bodybuilders that are spouting the nonsense that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, exactly. It's most of them. It's funny, the old school guys, if you look at what Arnold wrote and some of those guys from that day wrote, progressive overload was typically referred to as adding weight to the bar. These guys have now extended that. Oh, you can add reps and you can add sets. That's progressive overload. I can't argue that because, how do you measure that, right? These are statements that can't be really objectively contradicted. So we're not going to waste our time, right? But at the end of the day, when the muscles get bigger, the muscles get stronger, right? Yeah. And the most efficient way to get there, this is one thing I can't argue, is to add fucking weight, right? And I think that the reason, and I don't think they know it, these people aren't necessarily scientists, the guys in bodybuilding, because these principles have been around for a while. They're not new. They're just, you got a bunch of, so what's happened now in professional research, and I'll come back to my point, is that historically, if you've been in an exercise science program or familiar with that realm of academia, most of the professors were marathon runners and cyclists, triathletes, and endurance athletes that couldn't get a job, essentially. So they went to academia and they started studying exercise science. When you have the term science with a qualifier over it, that kind of tells you something. But anyways, they did a lot of papers in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even through the 2000s on the impact of endurance exercise and endurance training on all sorts of cardiopulmonary responses, and then it went into cancer, diabetes, and other things, probably in the 90s, 2000s, etc., but we have a lot of research on endurance exercise because these guys that trained in that ended up going into these academic programs and studying things they were interested in, right? And we're not going to go on a big rant about all that. And now, since the 2010s, these guys have gotten old and retired, right? And they're now being replaced by the Joe Weider fanboys in the 1980s. And now we're seeing a bunch of papers on adding sets, adding reps, doing volume, isolation exercises, all this other bullshit, right? And it's not 100% bullshit. It's just, who does this apply to? That's really what has always bothered me, like, I don't know what it's like to be on a shitload of drugs and be approaching ceiling effects of my ability to gain muscle. So that situation is not one that I can speak on, but I don't train bodybuilders either. So do I need to know that? Probably not. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I train people that have mediocre genetics, are often uninterested in taking steroids, maybe TRT at the most. If I get somebody that needs that, will take that, you're going to get an effect out of it. So these other assholes in these circles that say TRT doesn't do anything, that's bullshit too. And they're on a bunch of shit also,
right,
you know? So, but that's a whole nother topic. A whole nother episode, we'll get a guest for that, right? But y'all listening to us are not pro bodybuilders busting your ass for the last 1% of muscle gain that you can eke out, right? You don't have that problem. Your problem is that you don't have a whole lot of muscle to begin with, and when you lift weights, you don't see it really come on doing the shit that you've read in the magazines, maybe a little bit in the beginning, novice effect, but you might be... you might end up doing that and then still feel squishy at the end. I get a lot of guys on the skinny fat side. These are the guys that tend to reach out to me. They're just like, I lift, I can't gain muscle, etc. And the big guys, they already have it, so I don't have these conversations. That's more of a fat loss discussion. But the guys that are really interested in building muscle, a lot of the time aren't the guys that can build it very easily, And when I talk to them and I think about my own journey with this, I was one of them. I was a skinny fat guy and I was very bottom heavy. So I always had muscle on my legs, not nearly like I do now, but always bottom heavy. Top was squishy and not much going on, right? And through trying all these stupid programs, I was always good with diet. I could figure out how to gain weight. I could figure out how to lose weight. But I couldn't quite figure out how to put on muscle mass, right? Like I would just never look like I trained. That's what, I see these questionnaires I get. These guys say, I just want to look like I lift, right? And I know what that means. If it's a male, they want to have big arms, big chest, maybe a big back because, the funny thing I learned in master's program was, you do learn some things in academia. It's not a total waste of time, but I had a professor who was big into powerlifting, strongman, and Olympic lifting. And one of the things he said was, he's like, people care about the muscles they can see. And he's 100% correct, So if you think about most men, they're not sitting there and, if you're in bodybuilding, I guess you are, but most of us are wearing pants or shorts. We're not looking at our thighs, I started wearing the Ranger shorts to squat because they're more comfortable. So now I do see my thighs, but for the longest time I didn't see my thighs, because I just wore pants or long shorts, So, most dudes care about arms and chest, and, most women will sit, from my experience, they're thinking about thighs, glutes and stomach, a lot of, and then, when they're into the fitness stuff, I'll hear about delts, but a lot of the times it's, glutes, thighs, and stomach, right? So it's things you can see, right? So when I messed around with this, I figured out, when I used to complain, I'd be like, my arms look flat, like from the side view, I'd see my front delts from all the benching, I'd see my rear delts from all the chinning because I did, I was a swimmer, we had to do pull-ups. So I never had problems with posterior deltoids like these people because I did my fucking pull-ups since the age of 15, But then, I wouldn't get that lateral delt. And part of that is, I don't have short lateral delts that insert high up on the humerus like these, gifted bodybuilders do. So a lot of the way your muscle appears has to do with that too. How does the muscle insert? What's the length of the muscle? What's the shape of the muscle, right? You can't control, it's a non-modifiable thing, people. But the interesting thing is when I started pressing regularly and progressing it, my side delt filled out. It's visible now. It's long because I'm a swimmer, built more like an athlete. It's longer, right? It's not shorter and poppier like a bodybuilder, which is fine. But it's visible now. It's visible because I started pressing. But pressing is the most underrated movement in the weight room because people believe that you either do it with dumbbells or you don't need it. You need to do lateral raises, and we're not even going to go down that rabbit hole. But what I kind of figured out was, these lifts that we really promote cover everything. Your press covers your delts, all, mostly I think you get a lot of, the press has a reputation for hitting the front delt because you're raising the shoulder at the bottom. You're flexing the shoulder, so that a lot of that is anterior deltoid, but you're also rotating it as you press it up, right? So you're hitting pretty much all three heads, right? And the thing is, it's not heavy, right? So like anybody who says they have front delt problems, they're just not benching. If you bench, your front delts are going to grow,
Right.
Plain and simple.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And if you're doing chin-ups or rows, your rear delts are going to grow. But the only thing that I've ever seen grow my long-ass front delts is the press, right? And then you kind of go down the list, right? Like the deadlift, you see these nice backs, right, that are well-developed. Men and women tend to appreciate backs, different look, but I tend to see this across the sexes. I did all sorts of rowing, and rowing has its place. I will come back to that. But if you want a thick back, you have to train it isometrically. It has to hold position of the spine. That's what those muscles are designed to do. And I keep putting videos up about this all the time, that the back works in every exercise. So what makes the back work the hardest to maintain spinal position? A fucking deadlift. Because you're holding the bar in front of you, it's pulling down on it, and you're holding it flat. Every muscle that's attached to it grows from that. And once I pushed my deadlift up to 500, all that shit that I was convinced couldn't grow, grew. My traps grew, my fucking, my lats were already, I would always grow wider because I did chins, but I would never grow thicker, The deadlift took care of that, right? And, it's obvious, you squat, your thighs get bigger. Just plain and simple, your ass and thighs get bigger when you squat, especially if you push it up, but that involves dealing with fear and all these other things that we talk about, right? And then if you bench, so the bench taught me a few things, right? So I neglected the bench when I really got into this stuff because, I was getting a lot of the deadlift, I was getting a lot of the press, and I just, I thought my bench was decent. I didn't care about the bench. I didn't see the value,
Yeah.
But what I've learned over the last year, now that I'm really focused on it, is that, you always think of bench as like a chest exercise if you're somebody that's thinking about aesthetics, right? But
Right. Yeah.
and you think about rows as like a back exercise, right? But now that like I've done this for a while and I've really pushed those movements, those horizontal pushes and pulls, benching and rowing, I've kind of learned that you get a fuckload of arm growth from that, like
No, yeah.
you don't get a ton of pec growth and a ton of lat growth or trap growth. Remember, your traps go all the way down your back. I'm not talking about the part you can see next to your neck. I'm talking about the part in the middle, right? You don't get a ton of that from rowing. You get that from deadlifting. What I've noticed from rowing heavy is my forearms got bigger, my biceps got bigger. What I've noticed from benching, and benching, by me benching is like focusing on the bench. I'm benching like a bench specialist, is my triceps have gotten a lot fucking bigger, especially because I'm doing a lot of close grip, right?
Yes.
So, but if you want big pecs, you got to do dumbbells, plain and simple, because when you do barbell, if you watch a barbell bench, the bar is pretty much going up and down for the most part. It's not your shoulders aren't really moving through much range of motion, while your elbows are moving through a lot of range of motion. So your triceps are really doing a lot of the work with a barbell versus a dumbbell. You're going up and down, but you're also going in and out. You're bringing the dumbbells in, you're bringing them out. So your pecs get much more range of motion. So if your goal is pec growth, you're going to do dumbbells, and you're going to add weight to them. And we have a way to do that here. But my point. So just to kind of consolidate all this, for reasons that we probably can't measure and don't fully understand, when you hit these compounds, these muscles work together collectively to lift a big heavy weight, they tend to fucking grow, right? And it's not to say the isolation stuff does nothing. I'm just saying it's the last 2%, like for most of you, if you're a man and you're benching 135 and struggling, your efforts are probably better placed getting your bench up, and doing a 35-pound tricep extension isn't going to get your bench up, right?
Right.
If you're squatting 95 pounds and you're, 25-year-old dude that's, 185 pounds, you need to get that to 395, that's not unreasonable. And if you're a motor moron, then get it to fucking 255, like get the squat up, right? Your legs will grow bigger, right? If you're a woman and you want bigger glutes and you're squatting 55 pounds, get it to 155 and see what happens. They will grow, I know that certain guys, selling these booty programs will say otherwise, but those same guys are having their women squat too,
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing that I notice when talking to a lot of people is their idea of what a baseline level of strength looks like in terms of the barbell lifts is, well, they usually don't have one, and their idea of like what heavy is usually really light. So we've talked about this before in the podcast. When I go into a Globo gym, I always watch the guys squatting.
Right.
Occasionally, I see more women squatting now, which is cool. Because it used to be I didn't see any women squatting, but I do see women squat now.
Well,
but it's
women wouldn't
usually
go in the free weight area before.
Well, right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's been a big change as well, just, lifting barbells in general. But I always see the same weights. Like I see guys squatting 135 and 185. That's probably 80% or more of the guys in the gym squatting. They're doing one of those two weights. And and there's no in between. It's not like I never see 155 loaded on the bar.
No.
It's either
No.
it's plates and quarters, right?
Nobody uses 2.5s.
No, no way. They don't know. There's like one pair in the whole gym,
Right.
But it's occasionally you see a bigger dude squatting like 225. I don't see 275. I don't see 315. Once in a blue moon, you might see a guy squatting 315 or 405.
Yeah,
But he's
once in a
lost.
blue moon,
He's traveling and he's just had to drop in. And that's
Yeah,
the best
exactly.
place he could find. But it's interesting that I always see those same weights, and it kind of tracks with my experience talking to people that don't know about, that are just getting interested in strength training, but they don't really have a background in the sort of the world of strength training. I think they genuinely think that like 185, like that's a pretty heavy squat for a dude.
Oh yeah.
And they don't realize that that's like, that's really like you're just barely getting started. For an average dude, I mean, a 250 squat is kind of where it's like decently heavy for an average guy,
Yep.
And when we start getting to like a lot of guys, 315 is that's a really big watermark for them, or a really good benchmark for them. Is like you put 3 plates on the bar, and if you can squat that for 5 reps, or even better, 3 sets of 5 reps, then that's just sort of a hallmark of like you're decently strong. You're nowhere near powerlifting strong, not even close. We're not even sniffing that. But for an average guy, if you can squat that, you're pretty dang strong, and you're going to have a good set of legs. Right, but that 315, that's like double what most people are thinking is like what a decent squat would look like in terms of pounds on the bar. So there's a big gap there.
Oh yeah, and if you're a woman and you're squatting 75 pounds, which is what you usually see, you might see a 10 or a 15 on there, right? If you're watching women, you occasionally see the 25 on each side, right? The 95 pounds, but you're not going to see 135. You don't see that very often.
Right, yeah.
And once in
$135,
a blue moon, you get a girl that's traveling for a powerlifting competition. You might see 185 or 225, but that's rare.
Yeah.
But most women have the 10 or the 15 on there, is what I've tended to see. And what I see when I get women that hire me from that realm, they'll put like 65 or 75 on, and they're 150-pound women, or 100, somewhere from 120 to 160 pounds,
Right.
If it's a 110-pound woman, then we're starting somewhere, we're getting somewhere. But a lot of the time it's just, that feels hard, and then we're not even getting into depth, right? That's a whole other issue. But my point is, like, somehow we got this problem where weight doesn't matter, That's the main thing. It's like you're lifting weights, yet weight doesn't matter. It's the mantra, and they say it in a lot of different ways. And, because academia has kind of stepped into this now, they say it in a lot of different ways while leaving themselves out and saying, well, no, I didn't say you didn't need to lift heavy. What I said was this. And they like change one word of the sentence, But when you really look at it, it's like it's turned into this, you don't have to lift heavy to grow muscle, right? And that's fucking bullshit, That's complete fucking bullshit. And and how do you define heavy? That's such a broad term, right? Like, okay, that means you don't have to max out. I will agree with that. You don't have to do a 1RM. You may not even have to do triples, If you're a woman, you do, I would say that. But, if you're a male, probably not, But this whole idea that you can get around putting weight on the bar is a business model. They're trying to take your money. That's what that is.
Right.
Because here's how I'm going to explain it to you. When you turn lifting into an aerobic activity, which is what they've tried to do for 40 years, as they try to make it more aerobic, make it burn more, make you sweat more, make you breathe heavy more. That makes you feel like you did something because you're tired, right? And, aerobic work is hard. Running a marathon is hard. Running a 10K is hard. Sprinting is fucking hard. Nobody's saying that's not difficult. It's a different type of difficult, right? And it does require a certain mindset. We're not discrediting that. If you're pushing hard aerobically, you're still working hard. We're not saying you're not. However, and this is a big however, when you start increasing intensity, which means you're adding weight, you're trying to lift heavier and closer to the biggest weight you can ever lift, right? The analogy I like to say is if you do a set of 15 to failure, right? Say you do 15 reps and you truly fail where you're like shaking at the end, what it tends to feel like is everything burns. If it's a squat, your lower back's completely pumped up, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
everything fucking burns. You're breathing heavy if you haven't been doing cardio, and you're probably breathing heavy anyways, even if you have been doing cardio, right? And it just burns, and you're trying to finish it, right? 8s are in that realm, 10s are in that realm. You're burning up, you're breathing heavy, heart rate's going up, and if you keep adding more reps, do 12s, 15s, 20s, you feel like you're gonna vomit. That's a good way to put it. It makes you nauseous to crank out high reps to failure. You get nauseous. You want to puke, right? Mm-hmm. And some of you may have experienced that. Some of you think you're doing a 15 to failure and you're not, or a 12 to failure and you're not. But if you've done an honest set of 8 to 15 or more to failure, it gives you this nauseating feeling. So it's hard, and it makes you feel like shit, and it makes you tired, but it makes you nauseous, right? Now, my analogy is this. When you do a set of 5 to failure or a set of 3 to failure, you feel like your fucking body's going to explode. And instead of getting nauseous, you feel like you are going to shit your pants. Okay?
Right. Yeah.
So it's really the choice. If you had to choose, do you want to puke or do you want to shit yourself? I think most people would rather puke, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because at least it doesn't stay
right.
in your pants, right? You get it out in the fucking ground and it's gone, right? Simplifying. There's a lot of reasons for that. But, doing 15 reps in a row to failure till you almost puke, it's hard, you feel like you accomplished something, but there's no fear element to it, right? You're just like, fuck, this sucks. And it's like a mind game, right? It's an endurance thing, right? But it doesn't elicit that fear because you don't have this adrenaline dumping like you do when you're doing 5 or less. So it challenges you in a very, 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 very different way. And it's hard in a very different way that elicits fear and anxiety, right? And that doesn't make for good marketing. Hey, man, I'm going to make you lift a heavy weight that's going to scare the shit out of you, and you might shit your pants. Like,
right.
People don't want to sign up for that. But if I say, I'm going to work you so hard and have you do a superset.
Here's my credit card.
Yeah. If I'm going to say, I'm going to work you so, here's my credit card, make me shit myself. But people will hand you their credit card for you to make them puke themselves, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. Right.
That sounds plausible, doesn't it, Trent, when I say it like that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, CrossFit had at one point earlier in the early days of CrossFit, they had Pukey the Clown. Mm-hmm. You remember that? Mm-hmm. They were kind of romanticizing the idea. It's like, we work so hard over here at CrossFit, we make people puke. And then like,
dude, puking is marketable, but shitting is not.
Right. It's so ridiculous. But yeah, no, you're totally right. You're totally right. It's uncomfortable in a way that nothing else is. And
it triggers that fight or
this,
flight response, and I don't think endurance work does.
Right. Yeah, I was about to say, it's like, well, I think too, those that have gone through the public education system, the activities and athletics that you're exposed to there, with a couple of exceptions, they're all aerobics type sports and activities too, right? You don't the only sports that I can think of off the top of my head that really give you that sense of of getting crushed or like really straining hard against an external force is football. Especially if you play on the line, right? And you're pushing other guys that are pushing on you, and you get hit really hard, and there's a little bit of that
contact sports,
and I'm sure there's some other contact sports. Yeah, I'm sure. Like I've never played hockey, but maybe it's like that. I don't know. Wrestling probably is like that. But but you think about it too, and it's like there's a certain type of person that plays those, and a very different type of person that plays tennis, baseball, soccer, for the most part, right?
Right.
There's some crossover, but yeah. So it's just something that people aren't really exposed to anywhere else. I think though, if we turn the clock back 150 years, and we're back in a mostly agrarian society, I think that strength training would go over better from that standpoint, in the sense that like you get a bunch of people who from a young age have been lifting heavy ass stuff. They were little kids and they were carrying around 50-pound sacks of seed. They got to be teenagers and they were pitching watermelons or lifting bales of hay or whatever and slinging that stuff around all day. And, maybe they had been working with animals and had to really push hard against an animal and get out of a tight spot. Yeah, that teaches you stuff. But that's an experience that very few people have nowadays. And, Yeah, I think that's it. That's hard. It's hard to get people to buy into it, or I should say, buy in. It's hard to get people who are interested in strength training to get over that hump when they first hit that set. The first few weeks are pretty easy because they're working on technique and there's a lot of neuromuscular learning going on. Their brain and their central nervous systems learning how to coordinate their body in these
Right.
fairly complex movements. But then they hit they hit a point pretty soon where the weight gets legitimately heavy for them, and they've got to get over that hump of, that feeling of fear. They've got to face that fear, and they've got to get over that hump of just being okay with feeling like they're getting crushed to death for about 30 seconds while they do a set of 5.
No, that's right. I mean, you're going to get scared. If you lift heavy, you're going to get scared.
I do. Right?
I do too.
I've been doing this for years, and there's still like some moments where I get butterflies. Now it's
too.
a lot less than it used to be, but like anytime I throw anything over 405 on in the squat, I get the butterflies start creeping in. Something
Absolutely.
about that fourth plate, that does it to me.
I do too, man.
So yeah, it never goes away. You just get more used to it, and it's as soon as I step on the platform now, my focus takes over.
Yeah.
But that took years of practice to get there.
Yeah, and you're going to have to experience that. You're going to have to push through, and it's going to have to get heavier. And you can try it with 10s and 8s, and that last rep to failure is going to be hard. But eventually, you can't keep adding to 10s and 8s. Eventually, the intensity has to get higher. It's debatable if you have to go down triples and singles as a male. As a female, pretty confident that you're going to get a lot out of triples because it's a different situation.
Most women seem to, yeah.
Yeah, most women seem to respond well to triples. And I don't know that 10s, 12s, and 15s are useful for a female client. And we could talk about that in a different episode. I'd like to bring Steph on for that because she has different ideas about it. And, she said that, some women are explosive, and you can train them similar to males in terms of the programming, obviously. And, a lot of them are not, and they tend to do better with triples. But that's a whole other topic that we don't need to get into. But, my point in this episode is that you have to add weight to the bar, and eventually it has to get heavy. There's no way around it. It has to get heavy eventually. And, the main point that we want to hit on is that, when bodybuilders talk about growth, especially guys that have been at it for a while, they've been doing it for many years, they're on a bunch of drugs, they compete on stage. When they're talking about growth, they're talking about the last 2%. They want to add a fraction of an inch to their lateral deltoid. And maybe, just maybe, at that level, a lateral raise might do that, right? But when we're talking to you, you've been in the gym spinning your wheels, doing, pink dumbbells for your lateral raises, or, 10 pounds, 5 pounds, whatever, right? And you're not seeing any growth in that muscle. Or you're, doing lunges and leg extensions and things like that, or leg pressing 2 plates, which for leg press, not heavy people, just FYI, there are guys that will go in there and accidentally leg press 600, and, if you make it honest and fix their form, they'll still do 500, so 225 on leg press ain't heavy, so, you'll see people going in there with doing these, exercises that the bodybuilders tell them to do. And they won't really see their body change, and a lot of it is that their whole body's weak, and you're going to get a lot more out of a whole body stimulus at that level than you are out of a single joint or, dual joint, more focused exercise. You're going to get more out of a squat than a knee extension. But sure, maybe Ronnie Coleman, who was 300 pounds and ripped, got a quarter of an inch on his quads from doing a bunch of knee extensions, maybe. And I'm not saying he did that because I don't think he claimed that. He did 2,400 pounds in leg press, so he's actually a pretty bad example because he does closer to what we do. But, let's take a bodybuilder, right, that's at the Olympia in the top 5, and he's doing all that shit just to get, a tenth of an inch, right? You don't need to do that because you're not trying to get a tenth of an inch. You're going to get inches just by squatting, it's going to happen, right? And you're going to get inches on your back by deadlifting, and you're going to get inches on your arms by benching and doing rows, and you're going to get inches on your delts by doing presses, like growth for you is not growth for them. And when they're talking to you, a lot of the time they're basically taking things completely out of context by advising you to do things to address problems they have that you will never have. You will never have a problem growing muscle to the point where you'll need a single joint exercise. And That's not to say don't do them. I'm saying need. Need is a very strong word. Do you need a single joint exercise?
Right.
Most of us will never need them, just to be clear, especially if you're not taking drugs,
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. So to address that point really quickly, this is really not who our target audience is today, but for those folks who have been training with a barbell for a couple years, let's say, and they've put in the time and they've really driven their barbell lifts up to a decent level, but they're still average genetic folks, right? They're not super athletic, they're not super strong. There are some guys who go through a novice linear progression and they get their squat up into the 300s. They get their bench to 225 for some fives, et cetera. They get their press up. And they are, they have usually some pretty decent muscle at that point, but maybe there's some weak spots, right? Like maybe their chest isn't really that big, right? Okay, that does happen, and it's going to be dependent on their anthropometry and their genetics as well. And so, yeah, sometimes there is a time in a program if you want to add a little extra muscle mass to an area, you're going to have to do a little bit more. But guess what? The core of the training program is always the main barbell movements, and then you add to it with some select exercises, right? But yeah, to your point though, that's not a need. If you want to be strong and functional, then you never need to do anything more than the main barbell lifts. That they cover so much. It's something that's additive to that base, right? This the isolation exercises and the what would you call them? Did we settle on this? Dual joint,
dual joint.
Whatever you want to call them, right? The sort of supplemental accessory, whatever you want to call them. Those kind of exercises.
They're in between.
Those are additive.
Yeah, they're in between They're in between a barbell lift, like a squat, a multi-joint exercise, and a single joint exercise. So a dual joint, like a pull down your shoulders and your elbows, right?
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, you absolutely can build a very good body and a very strong and functional body with just a handful of basic barbell exercises. Yeah, I think that's really underrated. And the thing is, most people that we're talking to, they haven't put in a few years of barbell training, right? So if I'm talking to an audience of people who have put in, a legit 2, 3, 4, 5 years of barbell training, it's a little bit of a different conversation, right? But most people haven't done that yet. They haven't lifted to the point where it's really gotten heavy. And so if you haven't done that, there's really just you'd really just have one stone to unturn, and that's that barbell stone. So go at it. The nice thing is it's simple in that way. It's really hard, but it's also simple, and I think that's underrated. If you can apply yourself to the mastery of a few basic things, and just go down that road and see how far you can get, that's a really clear goal that you can pursue. When you get into these bodybuilding programs that want to have you doing 20, 30 different exercises, how do you apply yourself to that? What are you going to master 30 different exercises? Like you just really, every exercise ends up getting just a small focus of your attention or a small piece of your attention. But if you go in there and you do a squat, press, and deadlift, and you really work on mastering those 3 exercises over the course of several months, that's something you can actually apply yourself to and see your improvement on, rather than splitting all that attention and focus up over 35 exercises.
That's right. That's right. You made me think of something when you said that. I have two different guys. Actually, there's several guys. That transformer bar is a fan favorite here at the gym. And
okay. The Kabuki? Is that the Kabuki strength one?
That's the best safety squat bar in the business. The pad's not perfect, but it's good enough. But the damn bar feels like a low bar squat. That's why I spent the money. I sold my Yoke Elite FTS safety squat bar, which has the best pad. It's the most comfortable pad. But
because you used to have is it the Mars bar that you had?
A member of mine brought his in. I don't own one.
Okay.
So a member of mine, his sits here, and he's one of the guys I'm about to bring up. But I had a Yoke Elite FTS, or it was Elite FTS Yoke SS bar is what it's called. It's more like a high bar. It's in between a high bar and a low bar, I would say. And that had the best pad, so that's what I used to recommend. And I knew about the transformer bar, but it looked complicated. And then one of my colleagues at one of the gyms, starting strength coach, he didn't like it. He liked the Mars bar better. I never tried it though. So, I kind of took his word for it, didn't really entertain it. So when I was down in Cincinnati doing a nutrition camp back in October, I'm like, I'm going to travel up to Rogue and get some fractional plates for my dumbbells so I don't have to pay the shipping, and get a few collars because my collars are sliding off, right? So I drove up to Rogue, and I wanted to see Rogue, right? And then, they have the big warehouse, and they have racks set up, and you can you can mess around with all the equipment that they have out. And I saw their version of the Kabuki Transformer Bar because Rogue bought out Kabuki. So if you go to Kabuki's website, they have the Oregon version and they have the Ohio version made by Rogue with their proprietary, black powder coating, etc.
Okay.
First of all, I thought it was cool because they didn't have that stupid sticker on it with all the settings. They etch all the settings in there, so it looks pretty neat. Rogue designed it pretty well. So I liked the way it looked. But then I put it on the low bar setting and had the sleeves. The sleeves can go. So for those of you who aren't familiar, they have they have a setting for goblet squat, a setting for front squat, a setting for high bar and low bar squat, and a setting for what they call hinge, where you're really bent over. And then you can also slide out the sleeves and put them lower and lower from a setting of 1 to 4, with 1 being easy and 4 being the hardest, right? So you can drop the sleeves.
Kind of cambering the bar, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can camber the bar, and you can also adjust. So those settings about bar placement that adjusts where the sleeve sits in relation to your torso. So further in front of you, further behind you. So it's pretty trippy because when you put it to front squat, you feel like you're doing a front squat with the bar on your back. It's freaking weird.
Right.
But you move. The mechanics are front squat mechanics. So anyways, I bring this up because when I did it on low bar, I was like, this, to me, I've only squatted low bar, and I can hold the bar in the correct position. I can hold it with a narrow grip. I don't get any tendinitis, so I'm like, I have a perfect low bar squat grip. That's never had a problem. I don't round my back. It doesn't roll up my back. It's very rare. It does happen sometimes. It's very rare. It's usually after a rack pull. But I'm pretty good as far as being able to low bar squat, so I've never had to use one of these things. I have in my gym for members with shitty shoulders and elbows,
Mm-hmm.
So I tried it, and I had my flats on, but I was like, man, this feels like a low bar squat. I'm going to buy this thing. So I went back home. I sold this the Elite FTS Yoke SS bar. Sold it to my neighbor because they do workouts outside in his backyard. So they bought it. His one friend has bad shoulders, and they don't do what we do. So it serves their purposes. They love it. I keep hearing good things. And then I bought that. So it was like almost a $900 bar. And that guy I told you about with the Mars bar, his problem was he would run up the Mars bar, and then he'd try to go back to low bar because occasionally he likes to compete, and he only wants to do his maxes with low bar. And his chief complaint was that there was no transfer. He'd go to low bar with the barbell, and he'd have to take a bunch of weight off. And then this other guy that uses it, he has a bunch of nerve stuff in his arms, so he has to use it. And he said, and him and another guy I have online both said that the heavier it gets, the harder it is to keep their back tight, So the first guy has weird anthropometry, right? And his problem on the squat is he rounds his upper back. And you've seen this before, I'm sure. He has short torso, long legs, and he has to bend way over. Yep. So then it gets heavy, his back rounds. Yeah, his back upper back starts rounding like crazy. That build tends to do that. And the way that I've addressed that is I typically, front squats is what I use when somebody has a problem rounding the upper back, because in front squats, it forces you to keep that upper back engaged. You drop the bar, right?
Right.
Well, the problem with this guy is his fucking wrists hurt, so I can't get the front squat heavy enough to elicit, that contraction. So for years, he's just been battling this rounding of the upper back. Well, now I got this thing. We set it to goblet, and we put the camber we put the sleeves all the way down and cambered it the hardest setting, And that got him looking like a regular high bar squat. But then he also took it. He actually had to take it a step further, Trent. He had to put his heels on a couple of mats on top of it. And since he started doing that, he stopped rounding his back on squats. It just stopped happening.
There you go.
And it's addressed that, and his quads are getting bigger. So that was the other thing. His quads weren't really growing from squatting. And, we got him close. We got the 365 squat. I think he tripled like in the low threes. He has problems transmuting that into a max, and that's other problems that he has. But, he's probably good for a squat in the upper threes, maybe lower fours, right? And he just wasn't getting much leg growth because his hinge was so pronounced, like his hip angle would close so much that he was just all glutes, trying to stand up. And when he started doing these, you could tell his legs started filling out pretty quick, and then his back started, becoming more rigid. So, so to your point, you can manipulate certain things to target more muscles. If you have weird anthropometry or there's other things, like you have to individualize is what I'm saying. And sometimes we have to do things like that, but you figure that out post-novice.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So you just illustrated what I was talking about earlier perfectly, right? Like, yes, there are people like that. That's, not everyone is going to grow and have like big, huge full muscle bellies just from doing low bar squat, bench, press, deadlift alone. Most people, I would say, are going to have some weak points, but the whole thing is like, look, that guy still got his squat into the 300s before that became an issue, right?
Yeah, he squatted 363, and he was good for more if we could have peaked him right.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. So that's the thing. So for an average guy, that's the target, right? That's kind of the bar. Is if you're squatting 225 and you're like, oh, I think I need to do some goblet squats or leg extensions or front squats and stuff for my quads. It's like, you're wasting your time. What you need to do is get to 315. Okay. And then like it becomes obvious at some point because your legs will grow a lot from getting to 315, but then there will be some stuff that starts to lag behind.
Right.
And then you can individualize that and address it as needed. And again, that's as needed, right? Like, that guy probably doesn't need to do any assistance work for his ass and his hamstrings.
No.
Right? They grow just fine from the basic stuff. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So he's going to spend his time on quad focused stuff to fill out. So that's different again from the standard, templates that you pull out of the bodybuilding mags where it's like they have you doing a bunch of shit for every body part. It's like, well, if you grow just fine from one thing, just do one thing. And that way you focus your attention on the stuff that matters.
Well, then the other thing, too, is when you do it that way and you do a lot of single joint stuff, you get tendonitis. The average person gets tendonitis over a long enough timeline,
right.
So even with that, like curls, right? I did a bunch of arm work for a year. Got tendonitis. It's finally almost gone. And now 3 sets of barbell 1 week, 3 sets of dumbbell 1 week. Why? Because I figured out that the rows were driving most of it, and I got strong at all those movements. So the same principle applies. I can't do a lot of volume on single joint now,
right.
Because the intensity's higher. I'm curling over 90 pounds, which is a lot for me for reps, and I'm doing close to the 50s with the dumbbells, So there you go, Same concept applies. You have to cut sets because the intensity's high. It takes time to recover from that. But what I noticed was a lot of that neutral grip rowing drove a lot of arm growth, drove a lot of forearm growth. And all I really need is one supine curling exercise to hit the biceps a little more because when you row like that, it tends to hurt the elbows. And when you chin like that, your lats overwhelm the movement, so they don't really fail. The arms don't really fail on the pull downs and chin ups,
Yep.
But, that's an aside, right? Like, what if you paid attention to the theme that Trent and I are talking about, it's that you just manipulate how these lifts are done. We're not sitting there hopping on a machine bicep curl or doing a cable curl or a leg extension,
That's right.
We're manipulating the main lifts to target certain areas so that somebody gets more out of that because, they're more pronounced in one area. Like, you might get a guy with, short thighs and, a long torso that barely bends over, right? He's going to probably get more out of deadlifts and good mornings, for getting his hinge stronger, his glutes and hamstrings stronger, right?
Exactly. Yeah. RDLs, or stuff like that.
Yeah. Or get the transformer, set it to a hinge, like, like we've seen guys at low bar squat look like they're high barring,
Yeah.
Mars bar might be good for a guy like that where it's a problem for the guy that I have here,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's cool. Maybe I should get one of those Kabuki Strength
dude. It's worth the money.
Bars. They look sweet,
dude. It is worth the money, especially if you got old timers coming in.
Yeah, that's great.
The Rogue Ohio one is way better looking. They're the same price, so
Oh yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
The black looks
dude,
really nice.
Have you seen it?
And the engraving, yeah.
I'm
really looking at it right now on the Rogue website.
It's fucking sexy, isn't it?
It looks good. It looks very good.
Well, cool, man. I think we hammered that home. Just remember, if you're a male and you're squatting 135, or you're a female and you're squatting 65, bodybuilder's the last person you want to listen to. You're not dealing with the last 2%. And what you will get out of these main lifts is exactly what you want. Everything's gonna grow to an extent that's gonna make you happy if you push these lifts up. Spending 2 hours in the gym isolating every muscle is, it's just not going to add that much value to your workout. Remember, growth for a bodybuilder who's approaching ceiling effects is a fraction of an inch per muscle. and that's just me generalizing. I'm not being super specific with that, right? So 0.10 inches of muscle mass, and they're going to do an isolated exercise to achieve that for 6 months, or no, they 3, 6 months, however long, right? They're going to spend a bunch of time to get a small amount of gain. You, on the other hand, are going to do a fraction of what they do and get a larger percent increase because you're not trying to compete at the Olympia. A lot of you don't want to look like that, on top of it, So stop listening to them.
Chances are, if you've made it this far in the podcast and you're listening to us in the first place, chances are that you've tried this before and it didn't work, right? You spent months in the gym and you look pretty much the same as you did, after the first 6 weeks.
That's right.
We're done. And so, so just give it a try. Give it a year. Give it a solid year. That's like we were saying in an earlier podcast, like if you want to make some meaningful change, think about it in terms of 1 year at a time. That's probably
right.
a good, you're going to see some good effects before then, but give it a year. Dedicate a year to hard barbell training. See how far you get. And then, if you actually know shit, do that and you don't like the results, then I'll eat my hat. I don't have a hat, but I'll eat it.
Yeah, me either. I'm not eating shit.
How can you put a hat on that glorious hair?
I can't. It just sticks out everywhere, man.
Right.
I guess I could wear the, those little fedoras that Santana wears.
Right.
He has a hair stick. I think he ties
the other
it,
Santana.
Though. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Carlos. He ties it, though, I think, right? He doesn't have it sticking out like this.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen a picture of him in a while.
I'll have to give it a look. All right. Thank you for tuning in to the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at weightsandplates.com or on Instagram, where I post most of my content right now. We're moving on to YouTube. This podcast will be on YouTube with video. But you can find me on Instagram at _Robert_Santana. You can come to the gym if you're in Phoenix, in the Metro Phoenix. We're just south of Sky Harbor Airport off the I-10 near where the 143 meets the I-10. Weights and Plates Gym. So come on by. And it also has an Instagram page, weights _and _plates. So, we offer in-person coaching here. I do online coaching for diet and strength training on my website. And, happy to help if you need it.
All right. Well, you know where to find me on Instagram at marmalade_cream. That's where I post about lifting and also my audio production business, where I produce podcasts and I write music bumpers for podcasts and I do voiceovers, things like that. You can find me there. You can also go to marmaladecream.com if you're interested in some of my audio production services, but probably you're here for the coaching. And if you want to ask me a question about coaching or you're interested in online coaching, form checks, and programming, then you can go to jonesbarbellclub@gmail.com. All right, we'll talk to you again in a couple weeks.